Naila, why is English language important to learn?
This is because English language is an international language and is widely followed and understood by people across the world.
I want to learn this language.
To learn every language, there are some skills to develop. Follow this class to learn these skills.
Our viewers welcome you to our program English Language. This has been an English language program discussing series of topics we have within the English language. The aim of this program is to reach students who are within the basic level and the senior high school as well. It is also important to note that learners of the English language generally can enjoy from this very lesson. Those of us who are learning English language for the first time, it will be an important guide to you as well. This set of lessons have been on grammar, and we have been discussing relationship between clauses. We are going to continue from where we stopped the last time we were with you. Today's lesson is on the topic complex sentence. We are going to have complex sentence, the first part of the lesson, for today's discussion. Get your pen and your exercise books ready to join us for the program. Now let's look at the objectives for the lesson for the day. The lesson objectives include 1. At the end of the lesson, you should be able to identify a complex sentence. 2. You should also be able to identify the various clauses in a complex sentence. And 3. You should be able to explain how a complex sentence is formed. Now let's go into the lesson for the day. We are going to have a recap on compound sentence. Our last discussion looked at compound sentence. So a reminder of what we discussed as a compound sentence is. This reminder would help us to build upon our next lesson for today. Now in our discussion, we observed that a compound sentence consists of two independent clauses linked by a coordinator, as in A. He refused to follow the instructions, therefore he cannot complain about unfair treatment. We looked at a compound sentence, and we said a compound sentence contains two independent clauses, and these two independent clauses are linked by a coordinator. In the example we have just given, he refused to follow the instructions, therefore he cannot complain about unfair treatment. In this case, we have the blue colored part to be one independent clause. He refused to follow the instructions. Then we have the second independent clause in green colored slice, and that is he cannot complain about unfair treatment. And these two independent clauses are linked by a coordinator, therefore. And I hope you remember the category the coordinator is coming from, therefore. B. Send the agreed amount, otherwise they'd look for a new buyer. Again, we have two independent clauses here being brought together by another coordinator, otherwise. Now we have the first part of the independent clause of the sentence to be send the agreed amount, and the other independent clause that look for a new buyer. So these two independent clauses have been brought together by the coordinator, otherwise. Two, we also learned that coordinators that join these independent clauses can be of 1. Addition. What we are trying to say is that in our previous lesson, we realized that we do not have coordinators coming from only one category or doing one particular function. Coordinators perform different kinds of functions. And one of the things coordinators do is that some coordinators do help us to add information to what has been said already. And among such coordinators include and, also, moreover, besides, furthermore, likewise, then. B, we also saw coordinators that come under the category of result. And among such coordinators, we observed that we had consequently, therefore, hence, accordingly. C, we also did observe that some of the coordinators come under the category of what is known as choice, option to make from. And among such coordinators, we have or, either or, neither nor, otherwise. And then D, we also realize that we have coordinators that come under the category of what is known as contrast. These are just being grouped to help us easily just pick any coordinator that we want within the context of our expression. So under those coordinators, the coordinators that do fall under contrast, we discovered some like yet, but, however, and then still. These were major things we mentioned under compound sentence. Then we also did mention that coordinator is used to link independent clauses when the speaker gives equal importance to each clause. When a speaker places equal weight on the independent clauses that have been joined together, then the speaker would definitely go for what is known as a coordinator, which you've already seen in our above slides. Therefore, coordinators are used to indicate equivalence between clauses. So anytime we are speaking about coordinators in grammar and in understanding of what is being said, let's understand that coordinators are used to indicate equivalence between clauses. Equivalence here simply means that the clauses that have been joined together have equal weighting by the speaker. The speaker gives equal amount of weighting, importance on them. In summary, we said a simple sentence has only one independent clause. Let's remember, an independent clause is qualified to be a simple sentence. In fact, an independent clause is a simple sentence. It can also be said that, in summary, that compound sentence has two independent clauses related to each other through coordinator. So in summary, that's it. When we talk of what a compound sentence is, it's a sentence that has two independent clauses related to each other through a coordinator. Now, our lesson for the day, complex sentence. There are instances where an independent clause is linked to one dependent clause. So take note, we have a situation where an independent clause, that's a clause that can stand on its own, linked to another clause, but this time the clause that is being linked to cannot stand on its own, as in, he refused to follow the instruction while completing the form. So here we have two clauses here. The blue color slice is an independent clause. It can stand on its own and make sense. He refused to follow the instructions, which is clear. While completing the form is also another clause. And that doesn't make sense. While completing the form, we definitely expect something to follow. So here we have a full sentence. He refused to follow the instruction while completing the form. And in this case, we have an independent clause being linked to a dependent clause. The clause, he refused to follow the instruction, is independent clause. He refused to follow the instruction is independent clause. It stands on its own and is qualified to be a simple sentence. While completing the form is a dependent clause. Why do we say it's a dependent clause? It doesn't give a complete meaning on its own. While completing the form. Think about it. Does it give us a complete meaning? We definitely expect something to either come before it to give us a complete meaning, or something coming after it to give us a complete meaning. So we call such a clause a dependent clause. And remember, we are saying it's a clause because we can have a subject-verb relationship there. Here, the subject will be he. We do not repeat the he in our second clause. And then our verb is completing. So we have subject-verb relationship agreement there. The two clauses are linked by a subordinator, while. So we have the two clauses. He refused to follow the instruction, one clause, completing the form, another clause. But these two have been linked together by a subordinator, while. The linking word, while, is termed subordinator because the two clauses are not of equal importance in the sentence. So here, the speaker didn't give equal weighting on the two clauses. One is important than the other in terms of what the speaker is trying to communicate. So the speaker, knowing that one aspect of the statement is of greater importance than the other, goes in for a clause that depends on the previous one to give a meaning. And therefore, in linking the two, the speaker goes in for a word that is termed a subordinator, a conjunction that is termed a subordinator, to link the two together, to bring in clearly that the two clauses are not of equal importance. The independent clause, he refused to follow the instructions, is of a higher rank than the clause while completing the form. And that is why while completing the form depends on he refused to follow the instructions before the meaning comes clear. In a more elaborate discussion, a sentence could comprise one or more independent clauses and one or more dependent clauses. Let's take note. As you read passages, storybooks, you write essays, you have series of discussions on a subject at a wider level, or you are engaged in a conversation that takes minutes, hours, and so forth. There are instances where we construct sentences, we make statements that do not just made of only two clauses, as we've seen from the compound sentence up to now, but these sentences are made of one or more, remember, one or more independent clause and one or more dependent clauses. So you have a situation where in one sentence you have more than one independent clause. In the same sentence you have more than one dependent clause. As in the example we shall see, he refused to follow the instruction while completing the form. Hence, he has no right to complain. Here we have three clauses. One clause is he refused to follow the instructions. One clause. The next clause is completing the form. While completing the form, another clause. And the last one is he has no right to complain. So we have three clauses coming together in this one sentence. Now let's analyze them and see how it reflects in what we are discussing under complex sentence. The various clauses in the sentence, as mentioned, include 1. He refused to follow the instruction while completing the form, hence he hasn't any right to complain. The clauses in this sentence include 1. He refused to follow the instructions. Now we see clearly, he refused to follow the instructions. Makes sense. It gives us a complete unit. And therefore, we term such a statement, such a clause, an independent clause. He, subject, refused, subject-verb agreement, but we have it in the infinitive, refused to follow. So refuse to follow is a verb. So he, subject, refused to follow being the verb, having our subject-verb agreement there. So making the whole statement an independent clause. Now the next clause in that sentence is while completing the form. Now, while completing the form doesn't give sense, complete sense. It doesn't give us the complete message one will require. And therefore, it becomes a dependent clause. It depends on the previous one to give us the complete meaning. So if we join the first clause and the second clause, like he refused to follow the instruction while completing the form. See that while completing the form makes meaning. So at the time the person was completing the form, the person refused to follow instructions. But the speaker's most important attention is on the one filling the form, failing to follow instruction, and not necessarily when the form was being filled or was being completed. The process of completing the form is not what is most important to the speaker. The speaker's main interest is on the fact that the one completing the form didn't follow instructions. Therefore, while completing the form, since it is not an important aspect of the message of the speaker decides to bring in a linking word, a conjunction, which is while. Now, the third clause in that sentence is he has no right to complain. And that one also makes complete sense. We do not need any further information to be added to it or to precede it before we get the meaning coming out clear. And therefore, we term such a statement independent clause because it doesn't depend on any other clause to give meaning. So the three clauses, we realize in these three clauses, we have two independent clauses. Then we have one dependent clause embedded in between the two independent clauses. In this case, the speaker is placing emphasis on the first clause that the one completing the form failed to follow instructions. And the outcome of the person failing to follow instruction is that that person has no right to complain. So the two most important message there is that you fail to follow instruction and you have no right therefore to complain. The time of filling the form or the time the instruction was flouted, the period the instructions were ignored, where the time or was the time the one completing the form failed to follow the instruction. So the very period instructions were violated was at the time of completing the form. And that is not most important to the speaker. The speaker's most important issues there are the first clause and the third clause. So with while, subordinator and hence a coordinator. So you see here, while is used as a subordinator to bring in a dependent clause, and hence a coordinator to bring in an independent clause. So a sentence consisting of one or more independent clause linked with one or more dependent clause is termed a complex sentence. What we are saying is that if you have a sentence, and in that sentence, you can have one or more independent clause. Remember, you can have one or more independent clause linked with one or more dependent clause, then such a sentence is called a complex sentence. The two independent clauses, the one or more independent clauses do not need to follow one another in that order. No. And the dependent clauses also do not need to follow one another in that order. No. It depends on the craftiness, the ingenuity of the speaker or the writer. Different writers have different style of putting all these clauses together in complex sentences. Others go in a very simple manner. It is our responsibility that we analyze what we read properly or what we hear from people. As far as we become audience to them, it becomes our responsibility to analyze them properly so that we are able to place a necessary emphasis on what they also intend. Let's see below. I've never seen you when you were young, but I have no doubt he looks exactly like you. This is a sentence. Let's take that sentence again. Together, let's go. I've never seen you when you were young, but I have no doubt he looks exactly like you. How many clauses do we have here? I guess you are right. We have I've never seen you, one clause. When you were young, another clause. But I have no doubt he looks exactly like you. That's another clause. 3 clauses. Now, among these 3 clauses, one gives a complete sense. Some do not give complete sense. For example, when you were young. When you were young, it doesn't make sense. We need something to be added to it. So when you were young, it's a dependent clause. But I have no doubt he looks exactly like you. Makes sense. I have no doubt at all. I have no hesitation to say that the person looks exactly like you. Perhaps that's your child. I've never seen you. Also makes complete sense. I've never seen you. Makes complete sense. But here, when you were young, it's being linked to I've never seen you, which is an important part of the message. And here we have a subordinator, when. And we have a coordinator, but. Bringing all these 3 clauses together. At what time that I've never seen you? That is when you were young. At the time you were young, I never saw you. So the most important aspect of that sentence is that I've never seen you, but I have no doubt he looks exactly like you. These are the most important aspect of the sentence. When you were young, it's just an aspect the speaker is not placing much emphasis on. Then the second sentence, decision is in your hands, and you can decide to either punish the prisoners or exchange them for the refugees. The decision is in your hands, and you can decide to either punish the prisoners or exchange them for the refugees. How many clauses do we have here? I guess you are right. Now let's identify them together. The decision is in your hands, one clause. And you can decide to either punish the prisoners or exchange them. Let me take that. The decision is in your hands, one clause. You can decide to either punish the prisoners, another clause. Exchange them for the refugees, another clause. Here we have 3 clauses. Now let's see which of them makes sense and which doesn't make sense. Or which of them makes sense and which one doesn't make sense. The decision is in your hands. Does it make sense? Yes. You can decide to do whatever you want to do. And what are you allowed to do? So we see a coordinator adding a further information on it. However, the first clause makes sense. And what is it? You can decide. Decide on what? 2 things, options being given to you. So you can decide to punish the prisoners. That's one option given to you. You can also decide to exchange them for the refugees. That's another option given to you. So the 2 have been linked together by a coordinator, either or. So here we have two coordinators there and one coordinator. Either or, another coordinator. Bringing three independent clauses together. And the three independent clauses are: the decision is in your hands. You can decide to either to punish the prisoners. That's one. Another one. Then we have you can decide to exchange them for the refugees. Another. And these three have been perfectly linked together by coordinators. So here, the three clauses, the three independent clauses here, have been given equal weighting by the speaker. So that if you decide to do either of the two options given to you, that is punishing the prisoners or exchanging them for the refugees, certain decision is yours. Both all the three clauses are on equal footing, equal weighting, equivalency. That is why you have the speaker using coordinators and either or. Then 3. Neither social media platforms nor traditional media is incident-free. Nevertheless, you need them in making Neither social media platforms nor traditional media is incident-free. Nevertheless, you need them in marketing strategies. Hence, we have to compromise. Let's take that again. Neither social media platforms nor traditional media is incident-free. Nevertheless, you need them in marketing strategies. Hence, we have to compromise. So here, how many clauses do we have? I hope you are right. We have one. Let's identify social media platforms. Is incident-free. Social media platforms is incident-free. Remember, our subject there is social media platforms, and our verb there is. So we have that as one clause. Then we have traditional media is incident-free, another clause. These two clauses have been linked together by neither nor. Neither nor. Remember, anytime we are using these clauses, these coordinators, neither nor, either or, we always split them. That is why we see either, dot, dot, dot. Dot, dot means something comes in there. Then or, neither, dot, 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 then no. So that's why we have it this way. So we have social media platforms is incident-free, one clause. Traditional media is incident-free, another clause. Then we have you need them in marketing strategies, one clause. So 3 clauses, right? Good. Then we have another one. We have to compromise, another clause. In each clause, you have subject-verb agreement. We have you need them in marketing strategies. You, subject, need, verb. So subject-verb agreement there. We have to compromise. We, subject, have to compromise, another verb. So bringing them the subject-verb agreement. Now, which of these clauses is independent? Which of these is or are dependent? Now let's identify. Social media platforms is incident-free. Does it make sense? Yes, it does. So independent clause. Traditional media is incident-free. It also makes sense. So independent clause. You need them in marketing strategies. It makes sense, right? You need them in marketing strategies. What do you need? Social media platforms, traditional media platform. It makes sense. You need them in marketing strategies. It makes sense. We have to compromise. It also makes sense. But remember, the first part of the sentence, social media and traditional media. These are options brought together by the coordinator that allows us to make options. Neither nor. So that is why we have it that way. So having these clauses under one sentence linked together by coordinators is complex sentence. So the three sentences we have there are all complex sentences. And we realize that we can have a complex sentence where we have only coordinators linking all the clauses together. And we can also have complex sentence having coordinators and subordinators. What simply means is that a complex sentence can be made of only independent clauses. A complex sentence can also be made of both independent clause and dependent clause. This is where time will permit us to be with you. But before we wrap up, let's have a summary of all that we've discussed for the day. In summary, today's discussion looked at one, the term dependent clause. And what did we say is a dependent clause? A clause that needs another to give a complete meaning is a dependent clause by its name, dependent. 2, we learned the term subordinator as a conjunction. Now, a subordinator is the word that is used to link a dependent clause to an independent clause. Because the two clauses are not of equal weighting, dependent clause and independent clause, because they are not of equal weighting in the eyes of the speaker, the conjunction that is used to join them is a subordinator. And the last one we discussed is complex sentence, a sentence that is made of one or more independent clause linked to one or more dependent clause. This is where we shall end the lesson with you, hoping to meet you next week, on the same channel, the same program, English language. Until then, we say bye-bye.